The MOE itself is split down into three different pathways that are very, very similar, and then one that's a little bit different. So we've got a MOE mechanical, an electrical, and an electromechanical, and then we've got a MOE ICA, instrumentation control and automation. They're predominantly the only pathways that we'll use. So all of the core KSBs are exactly the same for the lot, and then there will be 5 specific skills that are different for each of those pathways. The assessment um, processes are exactly the same for every pathway in that they will do a knowledge test first. So when that person is ready for Gateway, the assessor will collect 3 job reports. They will collect the Gateway Declaration signed by all 3 parties, so assessor, apprentice, and employer. And they will also have an understanding of when they would like to be taking their endpoint assessment. So what I need, or what we need, would be 3 dates in about 3 weeks' time, 2 to 3 weeks' time, when they would like to take the assessments, because that's when we need to put them forward. What we then do is we upload that information and we put them in for a knowledge test. Now, the knowledge test itself is an online multiple choice test. It's 45 questions and it's 1 hour long, and it is done at BCOT. And we can do that at any point. So within sort of 5 days, I need to give 5 days notice to take a knowledge or to book in a knowledge test. That knowledge test is split down into 4 separate areas and they are scored. So each area is 25% of the final test, and they get scored for each of those areas. One of those areas will be principles, one will be maintenance theory, one will be health and safety, and then the other one is data and calculations. So, for instance, if we talk about the electrical version, that data and calculations will be Ohm's law, Kirchhoff's law, that kind of thing. So there'll be little questions in there. They're allowed a scientific calculator in that exam. There won't be a formula sheet because they won't need it. And the calculator will predominantly be there for them to just check that they're along the right lines. There'll be four answers, and the likelihood is those answers will be, is the answer 8.8, 80, or 0.08? So that calculator is just there to check they're along the right lines. That's an online test, which means that they get their results pretty swiftly. So we get them within 24 hours usually. However, if that candidate has been selected for an IV, it can take up to 10 days for that to come back. It's rare that that happens, but 1 in 10, they might IV it. Or sorry, 10%, sorry, 10% of all that do that over that cohort will get IV'd, but within sort of 10 days, then we get the result back from that. So from that point, we put them in for a planning meeting. So the planning meeting is an online go-to meeting, which City and Guild set up, and that is between the endpoint assessor, the apprentice, and somebody from BCOT and somebody from the employment. So usually their mentor or their manager will be at that. And that planning meeting is to confirm dates, confirm times, confirm the address if they're site-based or if they're field-based. They'll also want to know what 3 words is for that site, because some sites might be quite remote. So it's a good idea for the apprentice to know what 3 words are, because that's what they always ask. And they'll give a bit of a rundown as to what the observation looks like and how it goes about. So at that planning meeting, they will book in 2 dates. One of those dates will be the technical interview, and one of those dates will be the professional observation, or the sort of direct observation, however you want to remember it. The observation takes up to a day. So it's usually around 4 to 5 hours, depending on what the job is. But it's got to be in line with the industry time it takes to do that job. So if they're doing a top overhaul on an engine, for instance, it's going to be a lot longer than if they were doing a service. So it's industry relevant timing. That's why they say up to a day. With that in mind, there will be two dates, one for the obs and one for the interview. They won't do them both on the same day. The observation will be done in person, so the assessor will come down to that place and then they will observe them on their site, and then the interview is likely to be done over Microsoft Teams or GoToMeeting, whichever's easiest. The observation itself, the apprentice can plan and prep for that by looking through that endpoint assessment plan. There is a breakdown at the bottom there which tells them which KSBs are being assessed by the observation. So they know they will have to be assessed doing health and safety sort of checks and hazard awareness, that kind of thing. So there will be signs, labels, posters, COSH information around that the assessor is going to be pointing out and say, what does that mean? Or what do we do in this situation? If there was a leak on that, what would you do about it? Where would your risk assessments be? That kind of thing. They like to get those questions done en route to wherever the job is, get them done out of the way, so to speak. And then they will want to see the jobs being done. In order to pass the assessment, whether it's mechanical, electrical, or ICA, the assessor needs to see a planned maintenance job and they need to see a reactive maintenance job. Now, this can be the same thing, and both of those aspects take part on that same bit of equipment or that same bit of plant, or it can be two separate pieces of equipment, two separate bits of plant. But they need to see both of those processes, otherwise they won't be able to pass that assessment. So what a lot of our apprentices do is they start doing a planned maintenance, whether it's a 6 monthly PPM, and then there might be a fault on that bit of equipment that they then have to go and fault find and they have to put right. It's the process that they're following, it's the data and documentation they're using, it's the sort of fault finding analysis that they're showing, not necessarily fixing the fault. It can be that, for instance, there is a fault, they found what that fault is, they understand why it happened, how it happened, but because of time constraints, they can't physically fix that fault. So then they opt to replace the unit. That they can still pass. So they need to show that they know what the fault is, they found it, they've used correct fault finding techniques, they've used correct technical language to sort of explain what they're doing and how they're doing it, and then they opt to isolate, take apart, put a new one in, and then put that one in a workshop later for later repair, depending on what it is. The PPM, they need to be following a PPM schedule or some type of planned maintenance schedule, whether it's a checklist or whatever it might be. And they need to be showing that they're doing those checks, recording the correct data, making the correct sort of decisions, recording it in the right places, handing over or submitting that paperwork, that sort of data to somewhere or someone at the end of the job as well. That's what they need to see for the assessment. If they get both of those done within that day, that's what they get scored on.
Will they be asking questions
They will be
at the
asking
end?
questions throughout. So
Okay.
throughout that observation, at key points or when they feel that they're seeing something but they'd like a bit more information, then they'll ask a question, why are you doing it that way? Or what fault finding technique are we using now? What would be your go-to technique for this problem then? Tell me something interesting about that equipment that you're using. So they might have a piece of test equipment or a multimeter or something like that, and they're doing some checks. What they're asking for is it calibrated? How do we know it works? How do we know it's in date? How do we know that you're allowed to use it? So on and so forth. If they get a ladder out, has it been inspected? Has it been checked? Have you signed the ladder register? If they've got lifting equipment, they're the kinds of things that they're waiting for the right answer back. So that's why they would ask, but they're not going to outright ask, has that been calibrated? They'll be asking, tell me something interesting about that, or tell me what do you need to be aware of, or what are you aware of? It'll be those kinds of questions.
And do they have a certain number of questions they must ask?
So they do have a certain number of questions they must ask, which is fixed, but that varies depending on where they feel that candidate is, where they feel that apprentice is. Um, they are always trying to get that apprentice to the next level. So if they're working at a merit, then they will try and push them for a distinction. If they're working at a pass, they will try and push them for a merit. That might mean that they ask some more discovery questions. So although in the endpoint assessment plan it will state that they will ask 6 questions, it's likely they might ask more, um, but they're not going to be hounding them. They're not going to be interrogating them. It will just be, what else do you know about that? Can I bump you up a mark? So that's the observation. And then we move into the technical interview. Now, the technical interview is interesting because it is dependent on how old the apprentice is or how long ago the apprentice started their program. There's 2 different versions that we're working to. So we're an apprentice that started in 2022 will have 2 people that they were talking to, an assessor and an IV. If it is a newer apprentice, somebody who started their program at the end of 23 into 2024, there will be 1 person that they're speaking to. And that's just because of the changes in the version history. The questions don't get any harder. Then they're not being interrogated or anything like that. It's just about that quality assurance person doesn't need to be on the call in the later versions. They assure it afterwards via watching the recording. Um, so within that interview, the apprentice is allowed and should be taking their their portfolio with them. So they should have it in front of them at the desk. They should be tabbing it up, highlighting things through it, writing notes all over it. The IEPA or the assessor will have that in front of them as well, and that's how they've devised their questions. So it's a very good idea for the apprentices to know exactly what they wrote and where they wrote it. My advice to all apprentices is have a report that's very heavy on fault finding and fault finding techniques, so an interesting fault that happened where they were able to fix it. A report that is very repair orientated, and then a report that is very planned maintenancey or that's geared around a planned maintenance task. That way, no matter what questions get asked, they've got a report that they can refer to rather than trying to remember something that happened. They will be asking quite heavily on fault finding techniques. So the apprentices need to know what those fault finding techniques are. It's a good idea for yourself as an assessor to be going through those 7 different fault finding techniques. So, unit substitution, input output technique, half split, those kinds of things. They will be expecting the apprentice to know them, and they'll be expecting them to talk about them. Within some of the feedback that we've got recently, there are 5 areas where the questions are all around fault finding or fault rectification. Other things they'll be asking about is health and safety. So planning health and safety, what do we do when it comes to updating risk assessments? Where do you find your risk assessments? That kind of thing. What do we do in case of an accident? What do we do in case of a near miss? What is your fire procedure? Those kinds of things. Things that the assessor doesn't know because they don't work on the site. So they'll want to find that out. If the apprentice has done a very good detailed report, then the answer's already in the report and they're just reading it. So that's another bit of good advice, I suppose. Other areas they will be asking about would be, the theories behind maintenance. Why are we doing the maintenance in that way? Why are we doing it every 6 months, every 3 months? Why do we, uh, you know, drain that system down and rebuild it? Why are we vacuuming that system out before we recharge it? It's so that the apprentice knows why they're doing the job, not just what to do. Um, and then another element that they'll ask about is that wider business. Okay, that's brilliant. You know what you do, but how does that affect the wider business and what do they do? And do you have any idea what the you know the financial aspects are or the environmental aspects are or the quality aspects? Do you understand what ISO 9001 is in your environment? That kind of thing as well. And that's what they sort of key into for that interview. The interview doesn't last massively long. It lasts about an hour, for most people, to an hour and a half. So, and it all depends how that conversation's going. What they like to do is make it a conversation, though. They don't want it to be an interrogation. They don't want to ask a question, get an answer. They want to have two engineers talking about engineering. So that's how it should run. And that's kind of it then. So what happens? So those two elements on the same day, like I said, they're likely to be about a week apart in some cases. It all depends, what their availability is as well, and what the apprentice's availability is. Um, all of those details then get put into EPA Pro, and then we find out what grade they've got, as well as a little bit of feedback as to how that went. Now, the feedback is not great, as in they don't write reams and reams about this is what you spoke about or this is how well you did. If you didn't meet a certain criteria, it would be X apprentice didn't meet this criteria because insufficient knowledge or used incorrect terminology. It's very, very basic feedback. So if an apprentice asked us, "Oh, can I have my feedback?" It wouldn't really help them much because it doesn't help us much. It just says whether they've met it or whether they haven't met it. And then that's it for MOE. That's kind of it. At the end of that, each of those gets graded as a pass, a merit, or a distinction. And then overall, once everything's been graded, we get an overall pass, merit, and distinction based on what they got for each of those elements.
Thank you very much.
No worries.